Hello,
Hello.
my name is Janet, and I'm here to have a conversation with you on climate. My name is Jen. Could you kindly introduce yourself and what you do in climate and energy?
Hi, Janet. Nice to meet you too. My name is Joan, and I'm an environmentalist from Kampala, Uganda.
Okay, so Joan, which communities do you think in Uganda or maybe globally, which communities do you think bear the heaviest energy burdens, and how is that made?
Globally and in Uganda, the heaviest energy burden falls on low-income households, rural communities, informal settlements, and historically marginalized groups. And when we talk about energy burden, we are talking about the portion of a family's income that is put aside towards energy. And according to the global threshold of research, it shows that when a family uses over 10% of its income towards energy, they're facing a high energy burden a high energy burden. Sorry. So when we go to places like the United States, there is studies that over 3 to 4, I mean, there are studies that low-income households are spending 3 times or 5 times more money on energy than wealthier households, which already shows that there's an injustice in the system. And when we go down to sub-Saharan Africa, it shows, according to research of the Energy Agency, it shows that 600 plus million people do not have access to electricity. So this already shows that there is already energy injustices directed towards the poorest of communities, the most vulnerable people, and people who live in areas where they face difficulties, like, for example, according to their race or their class or their status or their income group. In Uganda, many households are spending a significant amount on their income in energy sources that are reliable to them but are really dangerous to their health. For example, kerosene, biomass, burning down of trees to create food. And when we look at this on a larger scale and the promise of a just future, they are not receiving the just transition that they were promised. And it already shows that there is a loophole in the system. And in the long run, all these energy sources, they are harmful to both the environment and also the health of the people.
So, Joan, now that you've talked about the context, energy, how energy is used, and the resources that are used for energy consumption here in Uganda, do you have a personal experience that you can briefly tell us about what resources were they using and how was the community affected after using this energy resources? Just briefly.
So I've had the privilege to go into the field and meet real life people who are facing these things. And recently I went to the field with the Brushwood Schools project where we were visiting schools and we were planting trees and helping them build eco-friendly stoves. And during that time, we got time to share personal stories with the cooks of the schools, the wardens, and they talked about their experience with using firewood, year day per day, month per month to cook school food for their children, and they talked about the health impacts it has on them. So when you look at this and all their stories, it puts like the unreliability of energy puts their lives at risk. And when you look at this, it really shows that the system has continuously deprioritized the poorest of communities. And in the heart of the issue, those with the least income are often paying the most, breathing the worst air, and receiving the least reliable energy. So understanding this is the first step towards moving to change.
Joan, thank you so much for these submissions. And now I want to proceed to the next question. And it's really about around gender inequality and intersectionality. So, how do citing air quality, heat islands, and energy insecurity intersect with race, class, and gender? Um, how how are you? How do you navigate that? How do they intersect? How does one fit into it?
When we talk about siting, air quality, and energy insecurities, all these issues, they do not exist in isolation. They actually exist in different layers, and they are all normally concentrated in communities where the people don't have the ability to push back. For example, if we are to talk about siting, we're talking about the polluting infrastructure that is established in communities. For example, oil refineries, power plants that can be for coal or nuclear, and all these power plants always have a lot of waste, and these places are always established. You never find them in the places, in the areas where wealthy people live. It's always in the areas where poor people live. So the polluting infrastructure is always established in places where poor people live, in places, in communities of color. And actually, research from the United States shows that Black communities face 56% more pollution than wealthier communities. First of all, because these sites are always put in their areas, and this already shows that there's an injustice in the system, because the ones who least contribute to the pollution, to the polluting infrastructures, are actually suffering the worst effects of that infrastructure. And when we are to come back home, we had the East African crude oil pipeline that was constructed, and it caused a lot of displacement of people, and it also caused a lot of environmental hazards. And the people are not even benefiting from these infrastructures, they're just being pushed away from their land. The infrastructure is just built, but there is no benefit for the local people. Gender makes this worse, especially in like rural areas, and this is often not talked about loud enough in mainstream discussions. For example, in Uganda, women and girls, we use biomass energy, for example, charcoal, wood, to create like lighting for our home, to cook food. And when you are to look at who collects the firewood, who goes to pick the charcoal, it's always the women and girls. So the time that they would have spent in on education, in economic activities to help boost their income, in rest, they actually spend it in doing things like collecting firewood. And when the firewood is brought home, we already talked about the health risks. It causes risks to the mothers, to the girls, and it also causes risks to their children. So when you look at all this collectively, women and girls are really disproportionately affected by the energy burden, and we need structural solutions to solve this.
Um, that was a powerful submission. I can just imagine the displacement of people who find themselves maybe their settlements are where the pipe is supposed to pass, the pipeline, the one you cited, and the kind of grievance they have to go through, and all of that disorientation because of developments like that. But just to take you now to the next question, what does meaningful community consent and benefit sharing look like in practice?
Meaningful community consent requires us to make a fundamental shift in how governments, developers, and communities relate. For a very long time, for example, in Uganda, the consultation is done when the plans have already been made by these developers. And even though they ask about what you think of their projects, whether you think negatively or positively about it, they continue and proceed anyway. That is not community consent when they come with an already made plan and people already ready to work with it. Real community consent is when they bring the plan to the people before they even think of making it, talking about having like one-on-one talks with the people and talking about sensitive issues like jobs, displacement, and its effect on the environment before they proceed to make plans. Because if they make plans and start anyway and talk to the people later, that is performance. That is like they just want something to slide with in case things go upside down. So real community consent really needs people to be involved from the beginning, to come up with how it's going to benefit the environment, but also benefit the people. We cannot be trying to transition to a just future or better living standards in a way that harms people, because that's not justice. So real community consent is really bringing the plans, the government, developers sitting with the community and bringing it as an idea before it's executed. Yes.
Joan, thank you for your submission. In your submission, you talked about the developers coming to the communities and implementing whatever they are doing within the communities. And remember, we are talking about consent, community consent. When you spoke, something rang in my mind, and I was wondering, does that implementation happen like that because these people in the community do, do not really understand or do not carry the weight or the benefits that will come with the developments that are being done? Is it usually contextualized to them to help them understand what's going on, or from your experience it's otherwise? Just help us understand that aspect a bit more, but also supplement also a bit more on benefit sharing.
Well, sometimes these projects and plans are brought to communities of people who barely understand what's going on, and sometimes it's important to bring the plan to the level of understanding of the people, because right now we are dealing with rural communities and people who may not have gotten the education, the privilege to education like everyone else in the world. So it's always important to always talk to maybe like the local chiefs, the chairman, or the chairwomen in the community and help the, and these people are the ones who help the people, the local people, to understand. There's also that part where the people just need understanding to say yes, to that these developments and projects and plans. But there's also a part of just bullying where like these projects are just constructed and you just see like a road coming first like through your home and you just have to evacuate because you're in maybe let me say an informal settlement and there's no like you don't have documents of land ownership, but you're a citizen. You are a person who has been on that land for long. So there's also that part of the bullying where governments or projects or these developers just come and displace people. So this is where the principle, the global principle of FPIC comes in. FPIC stands for free, prior, and informed consent. It's actually a rule principle that really, it's like you could sue these people if you know about it. If they did not get free consent from you, they did not give you accessible information, and if they did not tell you prior to construction of their project, you can easily sue them. And also, when these projects are being constructed, we need benefit sharing of the community. Telling people that a wind farm is going to improve the energy sector of the community or of the country is not enough. You have to talk about their benefit sharing. For example, you can talk about the reduction in the cost of energy, the jobs that people are going to get out of it, and also ownership stakes. For example, in Kenya, we have solar mini grids where people are now in charge of their pricing of their power instead of relying on external companies, and it's really helping the community. So this principle, this dynamic of ownership actually transitions us to um, from extraction, I don't know how to say it, but to sustainable development. Yeah.
Joan, can you share an example where energy justice, because you've been talking about things like where projects are sometimes it's inevitable to displace people and all of that. So can you talk about an example where energy justice shifted a project's design or location, what changed, and anything you could supplement around it?
So one of the clearest examples I can point to is from South Africa's Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, commonly known as REIPPPPP, where they were trying to build this program in a community. And then the civil society came in and also community advocates came in and they were asking, yes, you're saying you're benefiting the economy, you're benefiting the country, but how are the people in this community benefiting from it? So the pressure was so much, and it reached to a point where the project developers were forced to redesign the project. And actually, the people in the community ended up owning stakes, small stakes from the project. And also, it helped them create jobs because, like, the people in the community, they were given jobs to work on the project, and also the energy costs were reduced, and also the environmental impact was minimized when everything came to a common ground and everyone agreed to something.
Joan, in the example you have given, did the project change the design? Was the location changed, or just a middle consensus was reached between the project developers and the community?
Well, the project did not change location, but they reached a middle consensus where they minimized land disruption and also they included the community into financial ownership. So the environment was, let me say, if it was supposed to be destroyed like 50%, it went down to 40%. And also the people who are going to be affected ended up not being affected the way they would have been affected. The youths got jobs to work in the development, and also people in the entire community got ownership stakes, financial ownership stakes, which some of them they use them to establish their businesses, and others use them to fund health facilities, and some money was used for just to develop the economic sector. So instead of being passive hosts to infrastructure that benefited others, communities also became part owners of the same infrastructure and the whole development of the project. So it ended up benefiting the whole community and also the developers, but plus also it did not overly destroy the land.
And now we are going to the next question. This is really around solutions and policy. What policies or financing tools most effectively correct historic harms? Like if a project has been developed somewhere, there's been development and stuff, but there's been some harm or negative effects that have come with it. What policies or financing tools are being maybe implemented, or that you know of that maybe you could suggest that can correct some of those harms in the past?
Correcting historic terms needs targeted policies and financing tools that are intentionally going to work on a particular thing, and they should not be neutral. We cannot be working on a foundation of all these inequalities and always talk about that we need to find a neutral ground, a common ground for like the developers and the government and the people. First of all, the most affected people in Africa are the ones who are suffering the most effects of climate change. That's why we keep on calling for global climate reparations on a large scale and funding for adaptation. So when I'm talking about that's for the global scale. So when I come back here and I'm talking about the rural communities, the government, developers, and all these planners of these projects should finance ta- finance targeted subsidies. I don't know if you know what subsidies are. They are like benefits from the government to the people on their business. It could be like towards their business, or it could be towards reducing the energy costs for the people, especially low income households. Then the government can also provide equal ownership of stakes of the community, like how we talked about the South African projects, where both the government and the people and the developers are all benefiting. Then the developers can also fund a just transition. Yes, a just transition is very important because we have to protect and preserve our environment, but it must also protect the people. So justness should not just be about the environment and the transition to something better, but it should also be just in a social way where the people are not affected by the implementations of these developments.
Now, Joanna, moving to another question. How do we avoid doing gentrification as neighborhoods electrify?
So basically, green gentrification is one of the hardest conversations actually in the sustainability and climate spaces, because it confronts the possibility that turning into a green economy or transition into a greener future can actually affect people and displace them. So the dynamic is, okay, we are turning the city into a green city and we are building all these green parks and green eco infrastructure. And where we've seen it happen mostly, let me say, for example, in New York, in the United States, when this happened, the value properties went up, and people who actually fought for these improvements ended up being displaced from their homes. So, therefore, the green economy came with harm, and that's not what we are aiming at. So, in the African context, it may look kind of different because they may not create eco cities, but when they bring like a whole project of a solar farm or a wind farm going to be constructed, it's going to of course improve the environment and also, fight for like the just transition, but it's going to affect people because people are going to be displaced. So that's a form of green gentrification that we are facing in Africa. So a way to avoid that, something that we do, that the government would do, would be affordable housing protections put in place to protect the people and the community before the project starts, not after the project starts. And also, we talked about the issue of stakes ownership by the community, so that they are in this and they cannot easily chase them and push them out of their land because they're the ones who even like fall for these improvements. Then there will be necessary job creations because it would be very important to provide people with an income, especially in such a period of transition. And it would also be important for people to be in all steps of the planning process with the government, because a just transition that comes to only benefit the environment and harm the people is not a just transition. It's actually a green label seen as a just transition, and it's in fact a transfer of harm and not a change of dynamics.
So, what commitments should developers make before, during, and after construction?
Developers should bear responsibilities before, during, and after the construction, just like you have stated. And in the previous conversations that we have been having, we talked about the freedom of people and the consent and the information providing by the developers to the people before everything goes ahead. That will be before, for example, like talking to the people in the best way possible. For example, in their native language, it would involve communicating with like their local leaders to communicate to them. That would be before to follow all those steps and have these conversations with the people before everything happens. So during the construction of the project, it would only be an obligation and it would only be fair for people to be involved, just like we talked about. For example, ownership of stakes, giving them jobs, and to create a transparent process for all the people and every individual in the community. Then after the constructions, it's highly imperative that developers they keep monitoring how the project is treating the land, if it's still good for the environment, and in case there is any environmental risks or any risks to the people, the developers should be responsible for them and provide the necessary health care and provide the necessary solutions in case like something happens to the environment, and healthcare in case something happens to the people. So that will be after the construction. So it's like a general life cycle. It never ends. It should just not end because the project is done and they end up neglecting people and they end up neglecting the environment. So everything the way it started in the beginning should also continue just like how the end is.
Well, it has been a very insightful conversation around climate justice. So we want to thank all of you that have been following through, and also we want to thank our dear interviewee. If I'm the interviewer, she's the interviewee. Thank you so much for sharing with us that insightful information, and we hope that the various stakeholders can be able to pick it up and carry actionable points forward. Thank you.
Environmental justice reminds us that the climate crisis is not just about carbon, It's about people, power, and who has historically been asked to carry the cost of progress. Until we address those questions of power and equity alongside our technical solutions, we'll continue to build a green future on an unjust foundation.